we ready to go? Let's take a look. That's off, that's off, that's off. And that's turned on. Is the mic working? The mic is working. We're ready to go. All right then. Let's go ahead and get it started. Hello, Shadowcat back. And last week we had a really long, really good discussion, I thought, on the whole men versus bear trend that's been sweeping the internet. And believe it or not, it is still continuing even a week later. It's been going on for about a month now, I think. The one thing that I regret not doing last time was not having the actual original video pulled up. I really should have done that, just so that I could show it. But that's okay, because I learned from my lessons, and this week we have visual aids, audio visual aids. So we'll have that going for us. This week, however, I wanted to have a discussion about marriage and male-female relations in general. And the reason why is because I spend a fair amount of time trawling Facebook, which, you know, if McDonald's doesn't actually serve food and it just serves, cancer that tastes really good, which I will die on that hill. McDonald's does not serve food, but it tastes really good. Well, Facebook is just cancer for your brain. Well, not your brain, but cancer for your mind. It's mind cancer, okay? It's killing your ideas. But I still spend a lot of time on Facebook all the same, and Facebook, of course, is a far-left progressive institution, and so I get fed all kinds of stuff. Ever since the whole men versus bear thing kicked off, I was fed all kinds of feminist and woman empowerment stuff. I constantly get fed a steady stream of veganism and vegetarian stuff on the regular, and another thing that I seem to be getting a lot of lately is just communist propaganda. Which is interesting, because I don't even know why, but Facebook pushes it, because that's what they do. This is how you take over a nation. You don't go after the government, you go after the population, you go after the people, you go after the children. You push these ideas on children and young people, so that when they grow up, they will be able to push that on the next generation, and you create a treadmill effect. This is one of the reasons why, for the longest time, children were supposed to be off limits. It's why we had so many regulations on what can you put on TV in front of children. It's why we said we don't discuss certain subjects around children. We don't show things to certain children. We keep children out of certain areas. You're supposed to protect children and protect their innocence for realistically as long as you possibly can. However, once we decided that we were going to start targeting children, that all changed. Now it's a race to see who can get as many children as possible. And unfortunately, we have one side that still believes that children should be protected and shielded, and one that says exploit them all. So, really, we only have one side that's actually fighting. Unfortunately. But I don't want to talk about children today. I want to talk about children. Maybe we can talk about children next week. We'll have to see. Well, no, next week I think I'll be busy. Either way, though, I'm not going to talk about children today. What I want to talk about is the thing that comes before children, and that is marriage and pair bonding and things of that nature. And so, before I do that, I think that I should back up, and I should go back to why is it that we pair bond the way we do? Why is it that we create family units the way we do? Why is human civilization structured in the way that it is? And the interesting thing is that human civilization is structured the way it is almost the same way across the globe. Now, every culture is going to be a little bit different, but when you look at Western civilization, when you look at African civilization, when you look at Asian civilization, even when you look at the Australians, and nobody understands the Australians, we all do the same thing. We all bond into pairs, and yeah, that's what we do. However, just because we are the only animal that, or we bond into pairs, does not mean that we're the only animal that bonds into pairs. Many birds, many reptiles, many other mammals, there are a lot of animals in the world that will bond into lifelong pairs. The difference is, however, when those animals bond into pairs, they are bonded for life and they are very loyal to each other. What do we see in humanity, though? Do we bond into pairs? Yes, we do. But are we loyal to each other? The actual answer to that is no, we're not. And we can see that because if you look at the rates of infidelity, which I don't have those numbers pulled up, the actual numbers are not important. Everybody knows that the numbers of infidelity are way, way up. And that's just what we know of. We can also assume the numbers of infidelity were, reasonably high even in the past. We just didn't talk about it. It was something to be ashamed of. Now people are downright proud of their infidelity. So, I think it's safe for us to say that while humans pair bond and we are monogamous for life, it's not our natural instinct to do so. It is our natural instinct to be attracted to each other. It is our natural instinct to, pair off and to mate, to breed, to have children. But I don't believe it is our natural instinct to stay together necessarily, even though that is, it's what's best for the children. But it's not a natural instinct for us. It's something that we have to work towards. And so the question then becomes, why? Why would we work towards that? And before we get into that, I do see that JP is in the chat. Hello, JP. It's good to see you. I guess I should say it's good to see you again, because I see a lot of you lately now. I want to go back to religion. And I want to discuss that just briefly. We are not getting into a deep dive on religion here. But I have described myself as a Christian atheist, which I've gone over before, and I'm going to go over briefly here again, because whenever I say that I am a Christian atheist, it always makes people turn their head to the side like a German Shepherd that just heard a whistle. And if you've ever seen a German Shepherd that just heard a whistle, you know exactly the look I'm talking about. And if you haven't, go look it up, because it's adorable. Oh, and Blizz is in the chat. Hello, Blizz. Good to see you, too. Anyway, when I tell people that I am a Christian atheist, they give me the same look, like a monkey doing a math problem. And then I have to explain. I am an atheist, okay? And I do not try to hide that. I'm not proud of it, because it just is what it is. I do not believe in a God. And I do not believe in God because I have seen no evidence of God. And that's really what I base my life on. I'm a logical, scientific person. I base my reality on the evidence that I see around me. And I haven't seen evidence of miracles or divine intervention or anything like that. I've heard a lot of stories. But I haven't seen anything that corroborates them. And so, here I am. That being said, however, I do believe in religion. And that's really a contradiction now, isn't it? It's actually not. I'll explain. I believe that once upon a time, when we were just moving out of being hunter-gatherer peoples and we were moving into proper agrarian society, when we realized that if we were to eat an apple and we drop the seeds from the apple into the dirt, if we come back to that same spot next year, we might find a sprout. Or if we had, say, a squash of some kind, and we ate the squash, but we just threw the seeds out on the ground. We come back next year, and now there's a whole bunch of squash plants there. Eventually, somebody put 2 and 2 together to realize that, hey, these little things that are inside, if we stick them in the dirt, and we wait, they come back and they give us more fruit or squash or whatever it is. And then if we take a whole bunch of these and we put them in like one area, we can make one area that has nothing but these things. And thus the agrarian era was born, when we could stop being hunter-gatherers and we could become hunter-farmers. That was a major turning point in human history, because when that happened, it meant that we didn't have to move around as much, which meant that we could dedicate ourselves to building things now. We could build proper shelters that didn't have to be torn down every other month. We could settle down, we could have larger families, and that led to a massive increase in human populations. As a matter of fact, it really meant that human populations could be unchecked. Because if we need more food for more people, we just plant more food. As a matter of fact, we can plant all the food. We can plant as much food as we can harvest. And so human populations went from being whatever we can travel with to now however many we want. But here's a problem, and this is a problem that anybody should be very familiar with. If you have a very small group of people, and when I say a small group of people, I mean think of your household, think of your neighbors, think of your community, maybe think of like your classroom if you're at school, or if it's a small school, maybe just think of your class. Think of a small group of people and how easy or how hard it is to organize that. Okay, and you realize that the larger the number of people, the harder it gets to organize. However, with, sufficient effort, you can organize even an entire school. However, what about an entire development? What about an entire town? What about an entire city? What about an entire nation? What about the entire world? The more people you have, the harder it is to get people organized. And so, we needed to have rules. Now, of course, when it comes to rules, people need to have two things. Number one, they need to have the rule itself. And number two, they need to have a reason to follow that rule. I discussed this way back in my very first lecture I gave on laws, where I explained that laws are an ethereal concept. If I put a no trespassing sign in my yard, there is literally nothing stop you from trespassing onto my property. It's the idea that if you trespass onto my property, I may shoot you. Or I can call people with blue uniforms and shiny badges who may also shoot you. That is the deterrent to follow the law and respect my property. We need rules, we need consequences that we all agree on if we're going to organize society. And long before we had governments, long before we had congresses, long before we had legislatures, long before we had laws, we had religion. And what were the first religions that we had? The first religions we had were actually very simple. We can look back to ancient civilizations, in particular, but not exclusive to, the Central American religions, the Aztecs, the Incans, and the Mayans. And what did all three of them have in common? They all had their own belief systems. However, all of them involved the sun, to some extent. Some were more, some were less, but all of them involved the sun. And why did they all involve the sun? Because we understood that if you take the seed and you drop the seed in the ground in a shaded place, the plant will grow a little bit. If you take the seed and you drop it in a place where the sun shines, it grows a lot. If you lay in a place that is shaded, it's cold. If you lay in a place where where the sun is shining, it's warm. The sun is what gives us life. It gives us life, it gives us warmth, it gives us light to see by. We are, by default, diurnal creatures. We are awake during the sun. the sun is really, really important to us, and so the very first deity that we learned to give thanks to was the sun. And this saw the development of the first religions, where people would worship the sun, they would praise the sun, they would give offerings to the sun, they would make sacrifices to the sun. And this is how we organized our first civilizations. We would be the civilization of the sun, and these are the things that we do to organize our civilization, because we know that if we want to survive, we have to appease it. If we want to have enough food, we need to make sure that we plant our new plants, plant our seeds, in places where the sun will shine on and bless them. And to that end, we must be the blessing that we want to see. That may sound familiar. We have to do as the sun wants, which is to plant the seeds in the sun, if the sun is going to give them to us. If we disrespect the sun and just, ignore what it does, then we'll be punished for it. Okay? And so this became the very first structure in our societies. It was the very first religion. It was the very first rules. Now, of course, those civilizations did die off. There's not really many people around who still worship the sun. However, this kind of thing was not isolated. We saw this in many other places. And in some places, you would have people who would be capable of, say, judging by what's going on and saying, I think I know what's going to happen next. Because people, humans as a whole, are wired to recognize patterns. I'm sure you've heard this in places before. We thrive on pattern recognition. We love it when we see pattern recognition. If you've ever seen somebody who plays Candy Crush, what is it about Candy Crush that makes people play it so obsessively? It's pattern recognition. You have to get 3 of a color in a row. You're given an entire board filled with colors, and you have to find all those places where you can move one of those candies to create 3 in a row, or 4 in a row, or 5 in a row. And the way we're wired is every time you do that, you get a hit of dopamine. Because dopamine is the original drug. Okay? We do everything for dopamine. So too do we look for patterns in our lives. We look for ways that we can predict the future based on what we're doing right now, and we see that everywhere. Anybody who has ever checked a weather forecast has done this. You say, I look outside, I see that it's a bright sunny day. However, bright sunny days tend to be followed by fronts, and a front usually brings with it clouds. So you check the weather and you see that, they're predicting that within the next, 24 to 48 hours, there should be a line of clouds moving in. Meteorology is literally nothing but pattern recognition and prediction. So when we go back to ancient times, we find that people not only have realized that, hey, the sun is really important and the sun has an effect on all these things, but if I follow the sun, if I follow the wind, if I follow water and all of these things, I may actually be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. And they did. A lot. A lot of people were doing this. And we actually had a name for these people. We called them prophets. However, if you have a prophet and people say, well, how do you know what's going on? You're faced with a choice. You can either try to explain to people every last minutia of what you've seen and try to explain to them how you've made the different connections, which they may or may not understand. And even if they do decide that they understand it, they may still call you a witch. Or You can say that it was some kind of divine inspiration. I just know these things. I was told these things. The wind whispered it to me as the breeze came by. I saw it in the shimmering shadows underneath the tree as the light shone through the leaves. I was given a message from on high, and thus God was born. And the rest of that story is it pretty much just writes itself. After God was born, now we had somebody to obey, we had somebody to worship that wasn't the Son. And that came with it a whole bunch of new rules, because God is not the Son, and therefore God is not pleased by the same thing the Son is pleased, but God does come with a whole bunch of other rules that we can organize our society by. And now we're getting different religions, we're getting different faiths, we're getting all kinds of things. But more importantly, we now have new sets of rules to go by. And some of these rules related to behavior. See, it wasn't necessarily as important back when we were worshiping the sun, how we necessarily behaved. Obviously, if you want to live in the same civilization, probably don't go around killing people. Because back then, they didn't have the Second Amendment. They just said, hey, I've got a pointy stick, and if you try to kill me, I'm going to kill you back. So now we're actually working on getting rules for behavior. Things that you should say, things that you should not say, things that you should do, things that you should not do, and even who should you be around, who should you marry. Well, we didn't have the word marriage yet, but who should you be with, who should you have children with, and who should you be loyal to? And this was the beginning of organizing relationships. And why did we do this? Well, because way back when we were still worshiping the sun, sure, you could find somebody to partner off with, but let's not forget that during the era of sun worship, and even into the era of Christ, depending on where you were, it was not uncommon for the most powerful person in the civilization to have an entire harem of women around him. And there would be many children, the bloodline would be spread wide, and that meant that whoever's on top is going to breed like crazy, and they're going to have a broad and expansive lineage. And then some of the men beneath them will have no one. Either because there's no other females left, or because they are strictly forbidden from that. And one of the things that we discovered, and we discovered it over and over and over again, is that when you have a population of men, that population of men needs purpose and direction. And if they do not have purpose and direction, they will, like a husky that's been locked inside all day, they will make their own purpose and direction. And you will not like it. And so there's only two ways to really deal with this. The first, of course, is brutally, where you punish every single man who steps out of line. Either, you punish them corporally or you punish them lethally. And you make sure that the rest stay in line by fear. The other way that you can do this, however, is to simply give them purpose and direction. And what is a really, really easy way to give men purpose and direction? The answer to that is family. So, when we go back to the Abrahamic religions, and this did happen across the world in other places, you find this in Hindu scriptures, you'll find this in Shinto scriptures, but it's a really big deal when it comes to the Abrahamic religions. You find that many of them specifically stated that men have a purpose. Your purpose is to grow up, to worship God, to find a woman, to join with her, to procreate, and then to raise the next generation to worship God. And this became the first incarnation of the family structure being implemented in human history. But this was not necessarily a natural formation. Sure, we would find a female or a male that we were attracted to, we would come together, we would want to do this, but now it's actually being enforced. And it's being enforced on a one-to-one basis. You are free to find whoever it is that you want to join together with. Now stay there. We're not doing harems anymore. We're not doing these collections of women for one man. It's one man, one woman, one family, one purpose, one direction. Not the band. And from here, we can have communities. And when all the communities are going in the same direction because they all have common purpose, we have cities. And when we have cities with common purpose, we have nations. We have nations with common purpose, we have civilizations. And this brings us, more or less, to the present. But I have to point out the fact that it was an artificial construct that really put people together on a one-to-one basis, because the reason I call myself a Christian atheist is because while I do not believe in God, I do believe that we needed religion as a system of structure and a system of control. Because when we don't have that, well, we have to go, we end up going all the way back to the agrarian roots where we just said, you know what? Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter who you do, just plant the food so that we can go about our business. Like any structure, or like any building, you have to have a structure underneath it. Otherwise, it can only get so big. So that is how we used religion to structure our civilization and to create what we have now. So let's get into that small little unit. Let's get into the whole family unit thing. Let's talk about marriage, and I want to explain why I'm getting into this lecture today. Because, again, I was trawling Facebook, and the first thing that I came across, and I looked really hard for the post, but I couldn't find it again. I just saw a little graphic on Facebook, and it said, imagine if he took her name. And so I went looking through the comments on that one, because the entire idea was, you know, imagine if you got married, and instead of the woman taking the man's name, what if it was the man who took the woman's name? You know, just the complete opposite. No hyphenating anything, just he ditches his name, she keeps her name. Imagine how society would be different if we did that. And it's a nice little thought experiment. We can discuss that one. And when I looked through the comments, it was nothing but a whole bunch of essentially misandry, which is essentially what we saw in the whole man versus bear debate. But it was a whole bunch of women, or people at least look like they're women on the internet, which means they could very well be the FBI. No, wait, they're kids, I forgot. Anyway, it was a whole bunch of people who appeared to be women explaining how men would be so angry, men would be so upset, no man would accept it. There'd be revolution in the street because men could not tolerate such a thing. Because we all know that men are essentially giant 200-pound toddlers, and when men don't get what they want, they kill people. Which is why there's 8 billion people on the planet somehow. I don't understand how that works. The logic escapes me. But regardless, there's a whole bunch of people talking about that. But no one's ever really stopped to discuss, why is it that when we get married, the woman takes the man's name? Because at first glance, it seems arbitrary. Why would you do this? Why not just keep your own name? Why haven't we always hyphenated names? I mean, it seems to work for the Italians. They all have 16 different names in their full name. I mean, why can't we do that? I mean, aside from the fact that, well, the first generation would be hyphenated, and that would be 2, and the second generation would be 4, and the third generation would be 8, and oh no, it's literally exponential. Okay, yeah, that's a bad idea. No, that there's a reason beyond that. And of course, if you get over the fact that, you know, it's actually not arbitrary, the second reaction, which you see primarily from women these days, is that it's all about control. She has to take his name because this is just another system of control. It's a way that men keep a noose around the woman's neck to make sure that she has no identity of her own. Okay? Because women are property. They are property of their family, and they are property of the man that they become married to. And so women are not allowed to have an identity. They're not allowed to have an opinion. They're not allowed to have anything. A woman is a slave. Except that's not actually the case, and never has been. However, that's because we're still not going far enough. If we can get past the whole arbitrary thing, and then we can get past the anger that immediately pops up from so very many people, maybe we can discuss why we have a family name and why it's important. But before we do that, I do want to share one thing that I did save from Facebook. Because immediately after I saw that post and that graphic, I came across a video. And the video is titled, "A Woman Gives Her Reason Why Men Don't Want to Raise Another Man's Kids." And I'm going to share this one with you. It's a couple of minutes long, but we're gonna go through it. It will not take that long, I promise. But let's watch it together. Oh, hold on. I gotta change my audio outputs. There we go. That should be better now. Let's try that one more time.
Come up with every excuse under the sun as to why they ain't finna take care of no other man's kid, right? But the real reason is because they know that they can't conquer and control you with another man's kid. That's why most of the time these men want to knock you up. A lot of women think that men want y'all to have their babies because, oh, you're such a wonderful woman and you're so great and you'll be a good mom and blah, blah, blah. No, this is the lies that they tell you guys. That's not why most men want you to have their babies. Most men look at knocking women up as a meal ticket, as a place to stay, as a way to anchor themselves into your lives, a car to drive, whatever it is that these individual men are looking for in their lives, whatever they're lacking, they're using you. They're using your womb to solidify their place on earth and as a safety net. Because most men feel as though they can always go to their baby mama because they know how women feel about wanting the baby daddy to be in the kid's life forever and blah, 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 blah. They use all of that against women on a daily basis. Y'all think it's flattering that these men want y'all to have their babies? It's not. They don't. Men and women don't have babies for the same reason. Just like as little girls, we're taught to be a mom, learn how to cook, learn how to clean. You're going to be a wife one day type shit. And then the boys are taught, go out and sow your wild oats and sleep with as many women as you possibly can and get your money up. And the more money you make, the more hoes you get and blah, blah, blah. Totally different views in life, boys and girls. So then when you grow up into the dating world, the boys are expecting one thing from the women and the women are expecting Prince Charming from the man. And then everybody's confused as to why things aren't working out in a dating pool for most people. Are there people out there who got their special someone? Yes, but we know that that's a very low minority, right? So men know that other men have babies with women for the same reasons why they do, because men have a groupthink mentality when it comes to this type of stuff. They all are trying to survive and keep their lineage or their legacy going or whatever. That's all this is, right? This is why so many women end up single mothers, because the man never anticipated really actually being there. He just knew what he had to say to you to get you to lower your guard and to drop them draws, right? As they used to say back in the days, right? They know what to say to women. They know the right facial expressions to make when they're saying it. They know the body gestures to make when they're saying these things to get you to believe them so that they can pass their genes and so they can sow their wild oats and spread their so-called seed, which is really just a fertilizer, but it's a seed to them for whatever reason. We know that's not the case, but they still keep saying spread their seed, and I don't really understand why they're saying this, but whatever, right? Don't fall for this game. Don't get God. If you already got God, learn from your mistakes and don't get God again, right? Be one and done, or two and done, or whatever. Just, you know what I mean? Because y'all are not having these men's babies for the reasons why y'all think y'all are. Like, it's for two different reasons. And so, this is something that I understood as a teenager. That's why I never got guys. Now, some guys tried to get me. I had 2 fiancés that tried to get me, right? It didn't work. As you can see, I'm still child free, right? I'm just being honest, right? But I'm never letting a man in the past or in the future ever play me like that, because I know I would just end up raising those kids on my own anyways. So I would never let a man play me. Even if you get married, you're most likely still going to get divorced, and you're going to still end up a married single mother or a divorced single mother anyways. And I say that, and people think I'm trying to be negative towards women who want to marry before they carry. I'm just here to tell you that shit means absolutely nothing to men. It only means something to y'all. That's why this shit don't usually work out most of the time, because only y'all care about these things as women. Men don't care about this stuff. Men care about who they can exploit, what they can use you for. They get married for maid service and stuff like that. Men have a totally different view on life than women do. The sooner women understand this, the better off y'all are going to be. But if y'all want to keep believing in Prince Charming and believing, oh, the man chose me, I'm the one with the ring, I'm the one, and like not really understanding that you're the one that's just going to be the one that's embarrassed or abused or humiliated, right? He chose you, all right? He chose you to make a fool out of. And I hate to say that, but that's what it is. So to those other women out there who are listening to this who have not got yet, don't let yourself get got. These men are going to play you, and you're going to end up in the same boat with the rest of the women that's out here calling us jealous and bitter and miserable because we didn't become Pookie and Ray Ray's baby mama. So, just something for y'all to think about.
Okay, and I wanted to let her have the entire time of that video. After all, I don't want to cut somebody off, because then you could always accuse me of trying to cut out the important part. But just as we were talking about how, the woman taking the man's name, this is a system of control, this is a way that they can strip you of your identity, we also have this opinion, which is basically don't ever have children with men, because children and sex is just another vector of control that men are trying to get over women. Okay? Never, ever do that with a man. Never get involved with a man. Never do any of these things with a man. All it is another system of control. And this goes back to the man versus bear debate, where I was talking about how from the time of suffrage, you did have a few women who had a legitimate idea and a legitimate grievance, and it was almost immediately and entirely co-opted by misinterests who do nothing but hate men. It is the only aspect of their entire being is to just hate men. And so we never get beyond that. We never get beyond the anger part. We can already agree that no, it's not an arbitrary thing. The name change in marriage is not arbitrary. Having children is not arbitrary. But we've stopped at the anger part where we say, nope, this is actually just an assault against me. This is an attack against me, okay? This is done exclusively to harm me and every other woman out there. So let's discuss exactly what is going on here once we get past the whole anger thing. And we're going to have to take one more step back. So this is the last time we're going to do this, I promise. Take one more step back to when we started to found the family unit, when we started to establish marriage as being man and woman exclusive to each other for life. We go back to when we said that we needed to give men direction and purpose, because a man with direction and purpose is productive, a man without direction and purpose is destructive. And there is nothing that gives a man direction and purpose more than family. The idea was very simple. If you give a man a family, if you give him children to take care of, a man will literally move heaven, hell, and earth to take care of that family. And I don't want to hear about the case of this man left or this man was abusive. I'm not talking about the edge cases, because those are literally the exceptions that prove the rule. And as a side note, just in case anybody did not realize how or what that phrase means when they say the exception that proves the rule. The reason we say that is because if you want to make your case as an exception, you must first accept that the rule was there in the first place. Okay? You cannot say it's an exception if there wasn't a rule there first. If there's no rule, then it's not an exception. This is very simple logic. So, if you want to give me cases about abusive men and things like that, they are exceptions. The vast majority of men are good men. The vast majority of men want to be providers, protectors, and fathers. And that is where we're going to get into this. Why is it that when we get married, we change names? The reason is simple. Everybody wants to have a family. Whether they admit it or not, at some point everybody wants to have a family. Some people will get past this, some people never indulge in it, but everybody naturally has that urge to have a family. This is the meaning and purpose of life. Every virus, every rodent, every fish, every bird, every lizard has the same instinct because life's purpose is to continue life. Doesn't matter what you do with your life, so long as you have continued life, there you go. It's one of the points that actually Tim Pool makes when he talks about the falling rate of reproduction. He makes a very good point, and I think it's so salient I'm going to repeat it here. Understand that if you in your life do not have children, you will be the first in your bloodline that goes back to the dawn of time on this planet. From the time when the first amino acids linked up in the primordial soup to become the first DNA strand, or whatever it would have been back then. You are the first one in millions of years to not reproduce. The purpose of life is to continue living. To that end, we of course do the same thing. And when we created families, the idea of the family is that you are going to continue living. You're going to reproduce. You're going to make more of yourselves. So that there's a new generation. It's always about the next generation. Not the Star Trek show, but it's a good show too. No, it's always about the next generation. And so, how do we know who in the next generation came from where? And here's a joke that I heard a long time ago, and it always stuck with me because it's actually kind of funny. And so I'm going to repeat it here. It is very offensive, so brace yourself. A blonde woman goes to the hospital, already in labor, and already well, into 9 months pregnant, okay? She's ready to pop. She's, of course, admitted immediately to maternity. She's given a room, she's given a bed, everything else, and she is ready to give birth. And the doctor comes in, says, "Let's get this started," and they begin the birthing process. And after a long night of hard labor, the baby is finally born. The doctor takes the baby, holds it up, and says, "Congratulations, it's a beautiful baby boy." And the blonde laying in the bed after all that work looks up in horror and says, "Oh my God, is it mine?" The joke, of course, being that, yes, of course it's yours. You just gave birth to it. It's not the best joke in the world, but it's kind of funny. It ought to get a chuckle out of you. I mean, I don't expect anybody to be rolling on the floor over that. Blonde jokes kind of were a flash in the pan anyway. But the point being that when a woman has a child, that child is hers. There is nobody in the world who's going to argue that she gave birth to a child that wasn't hers. Now again, I know that there are some edge cases like surrogacy, egg implantations, things like that, but again, these are the exceptions that prove the rule. If a woman gives birth, there is no doubt that she is the mother of that baby. But what about the man? This is actually a subject that has come up a lot in recent years, especially in the US, where we have had numerous petitions, especially in places like Tennessee, Kentucky, the Carolinas, that particular area of the US, where they are pushing for paternity testing as a mandatory. So as soon as the baby is born, I mean, they're going to do a whole bunch of tests on the baby to begin with. I don't know what all the tests are because I haven't actually had children yet. But no, they do tests on the child, and one of them they want to be a paternity test, obviously. The reason why is because in some areas where they have been practicing this, they have found, and I know this is the high end of the scale, so this is an edge case, but they have found in some places a 50 to 66%, that is half to 2/3 case, where the father who was in the room as the baby was being born was not actually the father of that child. Now, those numbers are very high, and so I know that they are an edge case, but the cases where the man is not the father are not even in the single digits. They are much higher than that. The reason for this is because of infidelity. And infidelity was something that we were trying to curb. But because we have gotten away from tradition, we've gotten away from marriage, and these things are becoming more common. But this does go back to the reason why we instituted these things. The idea was that if you wanted men to be productive, they needed to have direction and purpose. The way that you give a man direction and purpose is to give him a family. And how does he know that child is his? Well, before we had things like paternity testing, it would simply be assumption and a name. Because when the woman married into the man's family, she would take his name, and when the child was born, whether that was female or male, that name would be passed down to the children. So the woman automatically knows that that's my baby. And now, because the child carries his name, that man and every other person in that settlement knows that he's the father of that child. And there's supposed to be no doubt there. That child has his name. To question it would be to accuse the woman of infidelity. It would be to dishonor the man by accusing his wife of infidelity. You just don't do it unless you've got damn good evidence. And so this was the way that we were able to trace lineages, and it also gave men purpose, because that is your child. And so now everything that you do, everything that you build, everything that you harvest, everything that you create and produce is for that child. Now, that is a single family unit, but when every family unit is doing the same thing, you have a community that is all going in the same direction. When every community is doing it, we already did this, I'm not going to do it again, but you get the idea. Every person going in the same direction. It was never a method of control, and anybody who knows about history knows that women have never been servants and slaves in any of this. Whether it was just the head of the household managing all the resources and finances that came into that household, or whether it was world leaders whom, when the husband was away on business, it was the wife whether that was the empress, the queen, whatever it happened to be, who was in charge of the nation. Women have never been servants. Women have always had responsibilities, they've always had duties, and they've always had status. And while that status may have always been one step below the man, it wasn't exactly a large step. It was, we're going to simply default to him when he's here, and when he's not, I'm in charge. Names and children have never been a method of control. As a matter of fact, this has been designed so that we can be complementary. We have always been complementary. Men have always been stronger, they have always been tougher, they have always been better fitted to hard labor and combat, which are the two things that men have always needed to do. Women have been the only ones who can bear children, until we develop some kind of artificial womb. That's the only way we're getting out of that one. And they have always been better at caring for and teaching. When you put these two things together, you get something that is actually greater than the sum of its parts. Separately, they can only do a partial job and not even necessarily an adequate job at that. Put them together, and they can do great things. Which is one of the reasons why we have seen such an attack on this going forward. We have seen that there is an actual war against the entire family unit where people are trying to divide families. Because you can't really divide the community if you have a whole bunch of families who know and care about each other. You have to divide that very foundational block. And if you can do that, everything else will just fall over. Now, an interesting thing along the same note, because I want to get back to the idea of control, is I was having a conversation and they brought up the idea of a dowry. Because if you're familiar with marriage practices, every courtship usually went along the same lines. If it wasn't an explicitly arranged marriage, there would of course be interest. And once you've expressed enough interest in each other that you decide that you're going to pursue courtship, you would first get, you might go on a date first, but usually it will involve meeting the parents in some capacity. The man needs to meet her parents. He'll want her to meet his parents so that we can bring the families together so that they at least know each other. And then we can begin the courtship process, which involves dates, it involves spending time together, learning to know each other. The families get to know each other, they learn each other's values and principles. We see if these are compatible because these are the things that we're trying to instill into our children. And if there's compatibility on all the tiers and everything seems to be going well, the man is allowed to ask the woman's family for permission to marry, which means that they can still say no to this if they feel it's not right. And if permission is given, then they are allowed to marry. Now, part of this entire marriage thing is you go through all the preparations for it, and on the day of the marriage, the man receives a dowry along with the woman that he is taking for his wife. And this dowry is a sum of wealth from the woman's family. And this wealth, of course, is what he is owed for taking this woman from the family. Okay? He is essentially being paid to take her. Because now the family is no longer burdened by having this woman in their family, and they will be more productive without her. Which is probably all you have ever heard for your entire life. It's probably all your parents ever heard for their entire life. It's probably even what your grandparents heard, and it's all wrong. So let's discuss what the dowry actually is. Everything about the courtship up until that point was true. And on the day of the marriage, the woman usually did come with a dowry. And this dowry would be wealth in various forms. It says here on Wikipedia, a dowry is a payment, usually such as property or money, paid by the bride's family to the groom or his family at the time of marriage. The dowry contrasts the related concepts of bride price and dower, which we'll get to those. While the bride price or bride service is a payment by the groom or his family to the bride or her family, the dowry is wealth transferred from the bride or her family to the groom or his family. Similarly, dower is the property settled on the bride herself by the groom at the time of the marriage, which remains under her ownership and control. So let's make this very simple. The idea of a dowry is this. We all understand that when men and women are growing up, they are raised in very, very different ways. Women are raised to be good mothers and good housekeepers because these are the expectations of a woman when she grows up. It is expected that if you're a woman, when you grow up, you should be able to keep a house, to feed a house, to manage your house's finances, to manage your house's resources. You are supposed to be able to run the house. You may not be the one running the house, but you are expected to know everything about the house and everything going on in it. Because when your husband is not there, it is your responsibility. And if he is too busy to do it, it is your responsibility. This whole idea that women are supposed to be just chained into the kitchen, doing nothing but cook and clean for her husband, has literally never been true in the history of ever. So a woman is raised to be the master, or mistress I suppose would be the appropriate term, of the household. Now, how is a man raised? Well, men are raised from an early age to be stoic, to be strong, to be tough. They are taught to be logical, or at least to suppress their emotions. But that does fall under stoicism, so I guess I already covered that. They are taught to be independent. They are taught to be self-sufficient. They are taught to be protectors. They are taught to be providers. They are taught to fight. They are taught to work. Until the point where a man is faced with a choice. Once a man reaches a certain age, he is expected to do one of two things. He is expected to either marry and to begin his own family, or he is expected to leave, at which point he will be completely responsible for himself, and he will receive no other support from his family. Because men are raised to be self-sufficient, or to be beyond self-sufficient, to be not just sufficient, but providers for themselves and others. And so when we combine these two things, we can see how these two things mesh together. You have the man who has been raised to be not just self-sufficient, but self-sufficient and beyond, and a woman who has been raised to take a house and manage it with whatever she happens to have. She is not expected to provide these things. She's expected to take these things and then allocate them. She has been raised from childhood to do this. He has been raised from childhood to do this. And when the two of them get together into a family, what you end up with is a provider who brings home resources, and she who determines what is done with those resources. And this means that they can manage a house, they can manage a family, they can manage children, and they can create the next generation and pass down those values to them. Both of them have direction. Specifically, the man has more direction, I think, than she does, but they both have a common direction that they're working towards. To that end, when a man leaves, when he marries another woman, or when he leaves home, he will leave home with nothing. The only thing that a man will be allowed to bring with him will be whatever possessions that he owns, or if the family is generous enough, they may give him something to take with him. This could be money, this could be food, it could be supplies, whatever it is. But a man is not expected to be given anything when he leaves. He is expected to leave and to go figure it out. After all, this is what he has been raised for. He has been taught since childhood how to provide. And if he cannot provide for himself, at least, on his own, then quite frankly, he deserves to die. And he will, if he can't do it. So, when a man is entering into a marriage, it is expected that that man will be entering into the marriage with almost nothing. He'll be entering into it with whatever possessions he has, and he'll be entering into it with the skills and strength needed to provide for himself and his new wife. And so, that's where the man is starting off. The woman is also similarly starting off with nothing, because women don't generally bring possessions and such into the marriage. After all, before she's married, she is provided for by her father. After she is married, she is provided for by her husband. So he is bringing nothing to the marriage, and she is bringing nothing to the marriage. Together, they have nothing. And so we have the dowry. The dowry, as it explains here, was payment such as property or money. What this essentially means is that when dowry was given, it would typically be, say, if the family owned an estate, they would be able to, say, cut the corner off of the estate and say, we're going to give you this corner of this estate to live on. You can build a small house there, and you can live there, and that will be your property. And if you think about it, think about how property lines look in places like England or France or Germany or even the New England states of the US. Think of how weird all the property lines are. Think of how bizarre the shapes are. Part of the reason for that was dowry. It wasn't the entire reason, but part of it was. Because you would shave off pieces of property to give. And so you would give them a piece of property and say you're allowed to build here, or you might even get the community together to build a house. And keep in mind that when I say build a house, I don't mean your house. Okay, I don't mean like a stick frame house with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a game room in the basement. When I say a house, I mean a 2-bedroom house. The bedroom and the everything else room. If you had 2 of them, because that would be super fancy. But yes, they might build you a house, or you might have friends who come and build you a house. It might also come with money. And what is this? The dowry is resources to get the family started. If I was to make a modern comparison, think of it this way. The modern comparison would be that if you were to get married, so let's say that you live at home, okay? You're living at home, your partner is living at home. You get married. The equivalent to this would be if both the parents say, you know what, we're happy for you, but you can't live here now that you're married, you need to be living in your own place. We went ahead and got a lease for an apartment. Okay? The lease is already set, it's in your name, the apartment is already set for you, and we had paid the first 3, 4, maybe 5 months in advance. Okay? So you can move into your new apartment together. It will be yours. You've got a little bit of time to settle in. However, after, 3, 4, 5 months, you're now expected to be on your own. You need to be paying your own rent. You need to be paying your own water, your own electricity. You need to be doing all of these things on your own. You are a man. Provide. You are a woman. Manage. That would be the modern equivalent of a dowry. Now, we don't usually do dowries anymore, and this is something that actually went out of fashion somewhere in the 1950s to 1960s. Ironically enough, well, coincidentally enough, I suppose, what else was happening in the 1950s to 1960s? The Equal Rights Movement. And as it turns out that with the Equal Rights Movement, when everybody was made equal under the law, they were also made equal under expectation. This is when we saw women entering the workforce en masse. And as women entered the workforce en masse, the expectations of them also changed. And as the expectations for women changed, the expectations of the families of the women also changed, and the idea of providing a dowry just kind of fell out of favor. It didn't seem nearly as important. And so you very, very seldom see such a thing nowadays, at least in most Western countries. You do still see it in many Eastern countries, though. You still see it in the Middle Eastern countries. Just not in the West. But I do want to mention something. So we have established what the dowry is and what it's for. What about that bride price, though? So most people don't even know that this is a thing. Because it is a thing, and while it is still practiced in some parts of the world, it's not a big thing. This fell out of favor long before dowries did, although it is still practiced in a few places. So the bride price, or they say bride dowry, bride wealth, bride service, bride token, whatever it is money, property, or another form of wealth, usually another form of wealth, paid by a groom or his family to the woman or the family of the woman he will be married to or is just about to marry. The bride dowry or bride price is the equivalent of a dowry paid to the groom in some cultures and is used by the bride to help establish a new household, and the dower, which property is settled by herself. However, very interestingly, there are many places where, let's see, where did it say that? I think it was was it under function? No, here it is, under function. So bride wealth is commonly paid in a currency that is not generally used for other types of exchange. According to French anthropologist Philippe Rospaby, I'm not sure. I know it's French, and French is weird, so I'm not sure how you'd pronounce that. Its payment, therefore, does not entail the purchase of a woman, as was thought in the early 20th century. Instead, it is a purely symbolic gesture acknowledging, but never paying off, the husband's permanent debt to his wife's parents. So, just as the woman's parents may provide property and money to help establish a new household, what the bride price is, or the bride dowry is for, is to essentially establish responsibility. To say that this is now my responsibility, I have a debt to you, and so we're going to go ahead and we're going to work this out, because I not only have a responsibility to her, but also to you as well. It is a lesser form of getting the household started, as it doesn't usually go to pay for the actual established home. but it is still a reciprocal action. And in some places, it actually does go to establishing the new home too. These are traditions. Traditions are not exactly cut and dry. They're not black and white. They do change from culture to culture. But the idea that, you know, the woman's family is just paying to take this useless woman off of their hands was always false. Continues to be false. So the answer is then kind of, why is this even a thing? Why are people assuming that this dowry was an insult to women? Well, as we already established when we discussed the whole men versus bear thing, and when we discussed prior to this, how people have misconstrued the idea of taking a man's name or bearing his children, the opinions that you're hearing are not the opinions of the majority. What you're hearing are the opinions of a very vocal minority, particularly a minority of misandrists. And their entire point, their entire purpose in life is to harm men in whatever way is possible. And there is no greater way to harm men than to demonize them for the things that they're raised to do, to try and break up the family, in their opinion, to liberate women from men, but in reality, it's just to further hurt men. They were the ones who began the idea that the dowry was just a way for a woman's family to rid themselves of the useless woman and pawn her off onto somebody else, because there is no way that anybody would want to marry a woman or enter into marriage unless you literally paid them to do so. Which doesn't make any sense if you go back into history and research any of this. Which is really a self-report on these people, because it establishes that they don't care about history. They've literally never researched anything. All they care about is hatred. But this does not come as a surprise to any of us. The entire purpose is to just hate. And to harm. And to that end, they have gone through and done their absolute best to rewrite history. To make it so that every single tradition that we have is literally just an assault on women. It's an assault on society. That men are all animals, they're monsters, they are predators, they are dangerous, they will kill you if you turn your back on them for 5 seconds. They hate every tradition that we have, and they want to see every tradition we have completely torn down. Why is this a problem? I mean, after all, we've shed certain traditions in the past, right? Why is this a problem? When I did my lecture on evil, one of the things that I went through and I did, and I explained back then, you know, as a Christian atheist, I am very familiar with the 7 heavenly virtues and the 7 deadly sins. I explained why, in great detail, we chose those sins for what they were. I mean, why did we choose pride, greed, sloth, envy, wrath, lust? Why are these sins? And why did we stop there? Why did we put some of those on there and not add other things? And the reason was because whoever came up with it did a very good job of actually picking things that needed to be focused on, because every one of those things, if we were to indulge in them, would harm the next generation or prevent the next generation entirely. In particular, we're dealing with a lot of lust right now. The idea was simply that if we are going to be successful, if we are going to grow as a population and as a nation, if we're going to be productive as a nation, the family unit is actually very important. We need mothers and fathers together. We need them to come together. We need them to be exclusive together. We need them to raise children together so that those children may bring about the next generation after them. And lust harms that. Because if you spend your time lusting after other things instead of putting your family first, your family is harmed and the next generation is harmed. We put all of these things in to make sure that we can grow and prosper as a species, to literally be fruitful and multiply as God commanded. But even if we take God out of the picture, which I will do in a New York minute, we are living beings. From a biological standpoint, we want to be fruitful and multiply. However, there are so many humans on the planet that we have outbred pretty much every other species on the planet. I know people will say, well, there's more ants on the planet than humans. Like, well, yes, you're true, but it's not the argument that you think it is, because if you look at even ant culture is highly structured. No, they're not building rocket ships, they haven't made computers, and they haven't developed 4chan yet. But ants are highly organized and highly structured. They have classes, they have roles, they have jobs. And so if any population was going to exceed us in terms of just sheer numbers, it would probably be the one that put as much time and effort into organizing their society as we did. If you want to have a large population, you need to have structure. Just like if you want to build a very tall skyscraper, you have to have a good foundation. These things are important. And so these traditions that we have are our foundation. Traditions make cultures, and culture is foundational. It is the reason why the biggest problem that we are having, the biggest conflict that we have in Western society right now, is not an external war with Russia or Iraq or China or whatever. The biggest problem that we're having right now is the cultural war inside of every Western country, where we have tradition and we have revolution. And that is what it is. The right and the left can be broken down very easily into tradition and revolution. Sometimes we will call them the conservatives and the communists. But communists are revolutionary, conservatives are traditional. We can call them right, we can call them left, we can call them whatever you want, but that is the essence of the culture war. Those who want to preserve what we have because it is good, and those who want to revolt against it because they say it's bad. And you know which side people are on, and you know what's going to come of it, because when you ask the people who are on the conservative side, what is going to be in place if you win, the answer is the same thing we've always had. And if you ask the revolutionaries, what will be in place if you win, most of them don't have an answer. They say, we will just simply have a more equal society. But they can't tell you what that looks like. They can't tell you who's going to exist in it. Tradition is needed. And it's like they say, you can't just destroy an entire culture and not replace it with something. Something will always fill that gap. And if it's not going to be Western, democratic, Abrahamic civilization, then it may just be communist. And as we've seen from all the different communist nations we've had in the world in history, none of them have lasted very long. And so every single one of those is going to be revolution after revolution, because that's what they do. That's what communism is. It's the revolution. And so if we can't have traditional Abrahamic culture and we eventually get past the revolutions, what will we have left after that? Because it may not be either one of those. We may end up back worshipping the sun because it may be the only thing left to us at that point. And we don't want to go back there. So keep traditions alive. They're important. And if you see somebody else denigrating them, maybe try to educate them while you still can. If you still can. Alright, I'm going to leave it off there. I just needed to get that off my chest because it's been kind of sitting on me for the entire week. And so I feel much better having done that now. It needed to be said. It's one of those things that I know is going on. And while many people are talking about it, very few people seem to be addressing that point directly. They'll say, yeah, we have a cultural problem, but they don't actually explain why our culture is important. They just kind of expect you to know. But similar to how most people don't know what the dowry is for, people aren't being taught this anymore. People don't know the anthropological reason why we got to the place we are, why we have the cultures we do, and what the purpose of them is. And even if you go to a place like the church and ask why, even the church will essentially say, because I said so. Or since it's a church, because God said so. On a certain level, I think it's because even they don't know. Which has always been a problem with religion. Religion does not encourage you to ask why. It simply demands obedience. But eventually, at some point, you have to be able to back up why the obedience is important. Otherwise, you end up with disenfranchisement, and that becomes disillusionment. Actually, I got those backwards. Disillusionment, then disenfranchisement. And after that, you simply get rejection. So, with that being said, go out, educate those who you think you can. I guess tolerate or maybe just block those who can't. But either way, try to keep the traditions alive. Do what you can to keep it alive because it's not about you, and it's not about me. It's about all of us. It's about the next generation. It's about the future. It's about life. So do the life thing. Keep on lifing. And if you want to hear more stuff like this from me in the future, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell icon. That way you get notified the next time this comes out. I don't think there's going to be one next week because I think I'm going to be busy with my local food pantry, but we'll see what happens then. If you know somebody who could use this discussion as well, maybe they are one of those people who believe that, every tradition we have is just a system of control, share this lecture with them. If you can actually get them to sit through it, it might actually change their mind. So, try it. But otherwise, if you just like me, leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below afterwards. Or if you'd rather, you can always join the Discord and you can leave comments there. You can come tell me what I did wrong, how wrong I was. You can tell me that I'm a big duty head if you want. I'm not going to discriminate. I don't have to listen, but I'm not going to discriminate. Tomorrow is the tabletop stream. We're still working on Warhammer. We're going to be working on Warhammer for a while still. Every time I turn around, there's more to do. But if you're interested in tabletop gaming, join us tomorrow for that one. But otherwise, I'm going to let you go here. I'm glad for everybody who came. Thank you, Blizz. Thank you, JP. Thank you, all the people in the future who may hear this. Have a good day, and take care.